This week on By the Numbers, we'll be taking a look back at last week's episode and the outcome of those tariffs imposed on Chinese goods. Then we'll be taking a further look at how lawmakers are cracking down on the Chinese with regards to their ownership of U.S. land. From there, we'll be taking a look at consumer spending. Are Americans living paycheck to paycheck? What does this mean for debt and delinquency rates and overall consumer spending? For now, sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and join us as we take you through the numbers. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Lyndsay.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. How about you? How was your weekend?
I'm good. It was a nice weekend.
It was a beautiful weekend.
I think summer arrives here in New Hampshire tomorrow with like 80s finally.
I know. I'm very ready for this. So fingers crossed it stays a good forecast.
Right. Doing things up here in New Hampshire over the weekend that other folks probably have been doing for months now. But like spreading bark mulch and, cleaning up the leaves. I feel like I was like raking leaves.
Too late.
I know it did feel too late, but my trees have bloomed. The bark mulch is spreading.
Oh, that's lovely.
Summer is upon us here in New England.
A good feeling.
It definitely is. So let's just jump into it this morning. I know that we talked a lot about China last week, and sorry if you only saw the free YouTube clip, but we did talk about China. And here we are on Monday, and China is in the headlines again.
Yes.
So I thought it was a great place for us to start today and a little bit of a why we're here also.
Absolutely. So it's very funny. As you mentioned, we talked about China and this kind of hypothetical tariff situation that we looked at, electric vehicle tariffs and solar cells and relative cost, right? Is China dumping? We had a great discussion on Monday we recorded. And then on Tuesday, the Biden administration must have heard us because they announced these tariffs the day this episode came out. So the news flow caught up to us, I guess we can say.
Yeah. So, I think it's a good place to kind of start today and talk about, we're here to bring the headlines forward. And the headline last week was a big what if. And we were able to put numbers to it and talk a little bit about what would these tariffs mean and is it a good idea kind of, and, what are surrounding countries doing. We talked a little bit about that.
Yes. So, and I'm so glad we had that conversation when we did, when it was still a hypothetical, because I feel like the whole purpose of us having this conversation and having this show is to just be the apolitical, the unbiased view of, if then what, right? If this is the tariff, what would that impact be? And we talked about the inflation impact. We talked about, all the political noise, which we can't avoid completely. So when these tariffs did come out, it was interesting to see. If you don't mind, I have a little bit of it's not a full data dump for you, Lyndsay, but
some information.
Some information.
Well, I think now that the tariffs came to fruition on Tuesday, let's talk about what they were, what the increases were.
That's a great place to start. Okay. And they hit on a lot of the categories that we had been discussing.
Okay.
So steel and aluminum tariffs went up to 25%. That was something we spent a lot of time on, domestic steel production. Always in the headlines. But the other big category is essentially green energy, renewables, electric vehicles, right?
And we talked a lot about your electric vehicle.
We did.
Your hybrid.
My coal-powered hybrid car.
I was talking to somebody about the episode and they brought that up in particular.
Oh, goodness.
And they just thought, like, how great of her to call that out because everybody's trying to do it for the right reasons and you included. But then there's this little caveat too.
I think it's good to be self-aware, to say I can do everything I want to. I can try to run my solar panels, my plug-in hybrid, but if my solar panels aren't making power, I need to know that, no, that's coming from a coal-fired power plant that I get my electricity.
Right.
So, well, anyway.
You do what you can.
You do what you can, and it's, we'll get there one day, I hope. But the electric vehicles is a really interesting place to start. We talked about the relatively low cost of Chinese electric vehicles. In fact, BYD, one Chinese company, last month, they announced their new electric vehicle model is only going to cost $10,000, which is much lower, let me admit, than my plug-in hybrid cost.
So how do you compete with that?
Well, that's what we ask. And so the tariffs currently on electric vehicles, pre-tariffs, let me say, we're at 25%. Those are rising to 100%.
Wow.
Which is a big jump and a big number, right? A full cost of that electric vehicle from China. Yeah. Batteries for electric vehicles and otherwise, that tariff announcement had been 7.5%. That's rising to 25%. And a lot of the critical materials that go into these batteries going from no tariffs up to 25% as well. So
wow,
a big jump
jumps
there. And the other thing we talked a lot about was solar cells. Those are going from a 25% tariff up to 50%.
Wow.
So there are other items we could talk about,
Right.
surgical gloves and things on the list, but those were most of what we discussed. So we did want to bring that update back.
Yeah, and I think it's a great segue into our first article that we plan to talk about today.
Yes.
So the first headline, state lawmakers are concerned about Chinese ownership of U.S. land, but other countries own much more American acreage. So it seems like lawmakers are really, 2 weeks in a row on our show,
Yeah.
it seems like they're really cracking down on China.
They're worried about China. And I'm hesitant to address this article because look at the impact we had last week. I don't know. We're going to have a track record here.
I
be
know.
notorious.
I know. Hey, I mean, I guess if we can, get ahead of things even just a little bit, even just a smidge, that's
Absolutely.
good. So I guess let's start here. What is the concern over the ownership of U.S. land by foreign entities?
So the concern, and I think of it is some of it's a little bit misplaced. So I do want to preface with that. But anytime you get worry about foreign ownership, especially when we bring China into the discussion, there's a little bit of that, national defense flair. A lot of these concerns came up, if you remember, back during the Chinese spy balloon saga, right? It's a throwback at this point, but that did happen. And so I think some of this is political rhetoric. A lot of state lawmakers are just looking for something their constituency wants, right? We tap into this nationalism, which is something that we at ITR have been talking about for quite some time now. And nationalism, concern about China, concern about against foreign interests, it plays well on the media. So that's why I'm excited to get deeper with you on this article and talk about what actually is the problem and is there a problem?
Right, definitely. So I think, the headline itself states that there's other countries that own U.S. land as well. So what countries own our land, I guess, is a good question.
That's a great place to start.
Okay.
China is actually not a heavy hitter in this space. As of 2021, that's the most recent full data that we have, the number one player was Canada.
Okay.
So of all foreign ownership, Canada, makes up 31%.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. One of the numbers that I had actually written down in here that kind of jumped off of the page for me was 1.255 million acres in Maine are foreign property. That's wild, obviously, to us.
That's a big
we're
number.
Here in New England.
I know, we're right next door.
Right. That seems like a lot of acreage. Is it safe to assume that that's Canadian?
Yes, the vast majority of that is Canadian. And in fact, one single company owns a third of the foreign-held land in Maine, and it's a forestry company.
Okay.
So a lot of this land, especially the article even pulled this out, Aroostook County, which is the highest, kind of most northward county in Maine, is 48% foreign-owned, but it's just all timberland. I think about 67,000 people live in that county. So it is not, they're not buying Portland, right? This is not a big holding. But that goes to the broader point of what is the ownership of this, what is the land that's actually owned by foreigners? And it's mostly private farms and forest land. Foreign ownership accounts for about 3.1% of U.S. private farm and forest land. Only 2% of foreign-owned land is not agricultural.
Okay, so talk to us about why that's important. So, delineating between what's agricultural and what's non-agricultural, which area would be the most concerning, I guess?
Exactly. Well, I guess it matters who you are and what you're concerned about. So various politicians have at times brought up the food security issue. Again, the numbers here, it's foreign interests in 3.4% of private agricultural land, according to a 2022 USDA report. So that 3% of agricultural land, that's not going to sink our food supply.
Okay.
We could probably be more concerned if they were owning critical infrastructure. There are obvious reasons that doesn't typically happen. But I really want to stress, despite the numbers, right, you can say There's 43.4 million acres with a foreign interest, but that's about 2% of US land. So, and of that, China specifically is only 1% of that 2%. So it's a very, very small number in total. Once we read the acreage, again, it's hard to scale. So I think it sounds a little bit concerning and again, makes for good headlines.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at it from an acreage standpoint, that sounds like a lot of land. But when you bring it into the percentage, kind of brings it into focus.
And the growth rate is up. So of that foreign interest in 43.4 million acres, that's actually up 8.3% from 2021 to 2022. So there is some amount of growth. I don't want to negate that. But again, we're talking about a very reasonable percentage here.
And maybe that's what this quote was kind of alluding to. So this was a quote from Michigan State University agricultural professor David Ortega, taken right from the article. Agricultural land can be a great investment. Foreign entities have bought this land for food production, energy projects such as wind or solar farms, or as an investment due to its stable growth and returns. So it sounds like it's just good business.
In a way, yes. The U.S. is growing. Foreign entities, they want to play in this growth market. We've talked a lot about this, that our growth rates are exceeding Europe's in our ITR outlook. And specifically, if you look at things like wind and solar farm production, that's up 77% in the past 5 years. So what an amazing place if you're looking to park some money. If you are looking to make an investment, a lot of these entities, they're looking cross-border. So I think this really just speaks to the U.S. trajectory. If you want to take it back to that nationalistic level, I think it could be turned as a positive.
So in further beating up on China, like we did, well, not we, but the articles did last week, and like this one sort of is today. You know, we talked last week about like the solar farms and the hybrid cars and stuff like that. What is the concern or tie-in if China is coming over and purchasing, you know, this property for solar farms and stuff like that? You know, we can tariff the products coming in. What is the solution, I guess, if it becomes a threat?
Again, it just matters which side of the table we're sitting on. Anytime there's transactions like this, there will be winners, there will be losers. We could look at this as the positive. These solar farms are being created, right? We have the funding to go in and install, right, the panels or the wind farms or what have you. But other companies that are maybe being priced out, right? They would have done this instead. So at some point, it's a trade-off.
Right.
And here again, I really want to keep this in context and in relation to the numbers, which is what we're here for. It's not just China that wants to play here in the U.S. Foreign direct investment into America is actually at a huge level, and it's more skewed toward Europe. So direct investment in the U.S. from Asia Pacific. In 2022, that surpassed $1 trillion for the first time. Big number, right? It was $972 billion in 2021, rose above $1 trillion in 2022.
Okay, wow.
However, foreign direct investment from Europe into the U.S. was $3.4 trillion in 2022, and that's up from 3.25 in 2021.
Okay.
So if we're looking at the major players, and by the way, just for context, U.S. investment abroad, our investment into Asia Pacific, that was about $950 billion both years.
Okay.
Our investment into Europe, that was over $4 trillion in 2022. So we play as well. We go back and forth.
I think that's a really fair statement to make. If we're going to be publishing articles and focusing on China's buying our land, other foreign entities are buying our land, well, we're doing it too.
We are.
It's kind of one of those, what's good for the goose is good for the gander kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
It makes the world go around.
There are such tight global financial linkages, trade linkages right now. You know, we can look at nationalism as a growing movement, so to speak, but we're not shutting back down all globalism. There will still be foreign direct investment. And if anything, we're benefiting from that here in the U.S.
That's all the time we have for today on our YouTube segment. Please remember to click the link in the description below to subscribe to our full-length episodes, or head over to itreconomics.com to learn more about By the Numbers. But for now, thanks for hanging in there with us. We'll see you next week. Bye, Lauren.
Bye, Lyndsay.